Your name's Rebecca Moore, isn't it?
Why?
You're Rebecca, right? At this time, Rebecca, listen to me, okay? So at this time, you're under arrest on suspicion of murder, okay? You're alleged to be involved in the murder of Sycad Ali, okay?
No.
When American TV producer Jonathan Walton befriended Marianne Smyth in 2013, he had no reason not to believe that she was a Royal Irish heiress who was worth millions of dollars. He remained unsuspecting of Smyth as they grew closer and became best friends, and he even withheld judgment when she was arrested for scamming a previous employer. Unaware of the true nature of Smyth's charges, Walton believed her story about how her estranged family back in Ireland were trying to withhold her inheritance from her. While incarcerated in 2015 and 2016, she persuaded Walton to loan her nearly $100,000 toward her legal fees, and he believed that she would pay him back once she was released. After initially believing that Smyth's diabolical family members had gotten her in trouble based on false allegations and that she was still working to get the case dropped, Walton saw that she had been convicted of a felony grand theft charge and was serving an actual sentence. He grew suspicious and quickly discovered that Smyth wasn't at all who she claimed to be. In reality, Smyth is an American career con artist with no royal connections and a lengthy history of scamming unsuspecting victims out of their hard-earned savings. She's gone by numerous aliases and has a criminal record dating back to the 90s and spanning multiple states, and Walton was particularly shocked to discover that she had stolen her own daughter's identity and used it to rent an apartment. Walton pursued charges against Smyth, and in 2019 she was found guilty and sentenced to 5 years in prison. She was released early due to COVID and moved to Maine, where she remained for the next 4 years. In 2024, she was arrested on outstanding fraud charges out of Northern Ireland dating back to 2008. Smyth has since been extradited to the country where she'll face trial for her alleged crimes. Number 20. Richard Broni and Linda Mbimadong. In what could be described as a typical modern romance scam, a 78-year-old Annandale, Virginia man believed he was in a relationship with a widowed woman in her 30s whom he had connected with on an app called iFlirt. Once the victim had developed feelings for his non-existent girlfriend, she called him and claimed that she had been arrested in Germany while traveling there to collect an inheritance of gold bars. She asked the man for bail money, and he paid it more than once, amounting to $518,000 in losses. The man had been scammed by a group of scammers based in the West African nation of Ghana, who siphoned an estimated $42 million out of numerous elderly victims over a 2-year period, started in 2019. Posing as diplomats, military members, widowed royals, and other financially stable and successful individuals, the scammers preyed on the loneliness of senior citizens who were seeking companionship. In 2021, federal authorities charged the New York City couple with wire and mail fraud for their roles in scamming 2 victims out of an estimated $660,000. 29-year-old Linda Mbimadong and 31-year-old Richard Broni worked behind the scenes as money mules. While they never interacted directly with the victims and played an arguably minor role in the scheme, they helped launder the money for a 5 to 10% cut of the proceeds. In February 2022, Mbimadong was sentenced to 3 years in prison, while Broni received a 19-month sentence. Mbimadong apologized during her sentencing, stating that she was selfish, ambitious, and greedy for success. Number 19. Kim Hall. In August of 2024, 28-year-old British beautician Kim Hall was stopped and searched by U.S. Homeland Security agents during a layover at Chicago's O'Hare International Airport while on her way back to the UK from Cancun. Inside her suitcases, they found 43 kilograms of cocaine, worth millions of dollars. The massive drug haul could land her in federal prison for up to 60 years if convicted of the charges that she's facing. Speaking with ITV's This Morning in November, Hall maintained her innocence, claiming she had no idea that there were drugs in her luggage. She explained that 2 British men she met during a trip to Portugal offered her a free trip to Cancun, which seemed like a good way to unwind during a stressful time in her life. Once in Mexico, Hall met up with the same 2 men who asked her to fly a suitcase of money back to the UK. They claimed that the money was for a relative and that they were unable to transport it because one of them had lost their passport. Following her arrest, Hall would essentially say that the men seemed trustworthy and the situation seemed harmless enough. But it's nothing new for someone in her position to deny responsibility for the contents of their luggage, and in the United States, travelers are responsible for everything in their bags. The authorities specifically advise people not to go through airport security without checking the contents of their bag and, preferably, packing all their own luggage. Travelers are especially warned not to transport parcels or bags for someone if they don't know what's inside and aren't willing to be responsible for it. Hall remains on house arrest in Chicago while awaiting her next court date, which is scheduled for January 2025. Number 18. James Plitsas. In April 2024, 7 News Miami reported the arrest of 26-year-old James Plitsas, who was accused of stealing money from people after asking to use their cell phones. One victim explained to the news outlet that Plitsas had introduced himself to her as an aspiring musician and performer who was trying to expand his following. She agreed to follow him on Instagram and handed him her phone so he could pull up his profile, at which point Plitsas went into the woman's Venmo account and sent himself $1,200. According to law enforcement, Plitsas carried out the thefts with a friend, Michael Martin. The men reportedly targeted beachgoers while posing as club promoters and artists, often promising VIP access to exclusive bars and clubs. Following the arrests of Plitsas and Martin for organized scheme to defraud and grand theft, the Miami Beach Police Department warned the public about the types of scams that the suspects were accused of running. The agency strongly cautioned people against handing any of their belongings to a stranger, especially their phone. There's been a noticeable rise in these types of scams, which involve the scammer asking to use a stranger's phone and going straight into the person's banking apps. In many cases, the perpetrator creates a sense of urgency by acting like they're in distress or experiencing an emergency. Records show that Plitsas was convicted of 5 counts of grand theft in the amount of more than $750. He's serving a 4-year probation sentence, which is scheduled to end in August 2028. The outcome of Martin's case is unclear. Number 17. Roxanne Reed. During the summer of 2018, police in Garner, North Carolina, received information from relatives of 65-year-old Roxanne Reed, who they claimed was being swindled by a romance scammer. Detectives soon discovered evidence that Reed was talking with 2 scammers. During her conversations with one of them, she talked about a plan to kill her 88-year-old mother, whom she shared a home with, in order to obtain a $20,000 life insurance payout. Reed and the scammer, who went by the name Scott Humple or Scott Humpow, initially discussed the prospect of poisoning her mother's coffee. They also talked about using arsenic or cyanide, and further investigation revealed that the scammer was using the name and photos of a physical therapist in Texas who had no knowledge of or involvement in the crimes. When questioned by investigators, Reed admitted to having the conversations with the scammer but denied having any serious intentions of harming her mother. She reportedly chalked the disturbing discussions up to harmless banter, claiming that she never considered the interactions to be real. But the evidence suggested that Reed may have had a very real motive for possibly being serious about the plan. She admitted to the police that she had taken thousands of dollars from a friend in the form of a bank withdrawal and credit card advance. Reed was booked into custody on a felony charge of conspiracy to commit murder. It's hard to trace exactly what happened after this due to a lack of reports detailing the outcome of the case. Based on state records, it appears as though the conspiracy charge was dismissed for reasons that are unclear. Since then, Reed has been convicted of numerous other crimes, including identity theft and obtaining property by false pretense, and has served both jail time and probation for her past offenses. Now 71 years old, the senior citizen was arrested in January 2024 on felony charges of breaking and entering, larceny after breaking or entering, and obtaining property by false pretense. According to an indictment document, she broke into a man's home in Wake County and stole his sterling silver silverware, a pair of Oakley sunglasses, and a gold class ring, which have an estimated collective value of $2,100. She then pawned the ring for $360. Reed is currently free on a $15,000 unsecured bond amid her current case and appears to be fighting the charges. Her next hearing is scheduled for mid-December. Number 16. Priscilla Kelly Delmaro. When a successful young marketing professional named Niall Rice fell for a woman who didn't return his feelings, he entered a psychic's shop in Manhattan looking for hope, direction, and answers to his loneliness. He paid the psychic, Brandy, $2,500 for a reading. In 2013, Rice began going to another psychic, 26-year-old Priscilla Kelly Delmaro, who was located in Times Square. He had no history of going to fortune tellers or falling for scams, but now he was doing both, and it would continue for the next 20 months. The cost of getting the universe to turn in his favor quickly began to add up, but Rice continued to faithfully seek Delmaro's services. When things in his life failed to take a positive turn, according to Delmaro's predictions, she blamed bad energy and said she needed money for materials and rituals. At one point, she told Rice she needed to buy a time machine, but was happy to accept a $30,000 Rolex. Instead of realizing he was being scammed, Rice began to believe that bad things would happen to him if he didn't give Delmaro cash whenever she asked for it. When the woman he desperately wanted to be with passed away, Delmaro convinced him that bad spirits killed her and offered to reincarnate the woman, for a price, of course. By then, Rice had dropped nearly $400,000 on her services, including $90,000 to build a golden bridge to another dimension where Delmaro would use her gifts to ward off yet another evil spirit. He eventually spent more than $700,000 on psychics, leaving him penniless. Rice eventually realized he had been duped and that he had turned to fortune tellers at a time when he should have sought mental help. His vulnerability had been taken advantage of, and Delmaro pleaded guilty to 1 count of grand larceny for swindling Rice. She served 8 months in jail, followed by 4 years of probation, amounting to what seemed like a slap on the wrist to Rice, who knew he would probably never see a dime of his money back. Number 15. Rebecca Moore.
Have you got like a bank card or anything on you?
I don't have a friend, sorry.
Just come up to where I am, please.
What's going on?
Just take your hat off for me.
What?
While playing video games with a friend at 4 a.m. in March of 2024, 24-year-old drug dealer Sakad Ali received a phone call from an unfamiliar number. It was 25-year-old Rebecca Moore, a local escort. She persuaded Ali to meet her at a nearby park in Sheffield, England, where he was ambushed and stabbed to death by machete-wielding rival drug dealers Barney Griffin and Jack Douglas. The killers were upset with Ali for supposedly selling his products on their turf. He pleaded for his life, but his assailants showed no mercy. Ali was pronounced dead at the scene, and authorities charged Moore, Griffin and Douglas with his murder. According to the prosecution, Moore acted as bait by promising to buy crack cocaine from Ali and offering intimacy. She was accused of laughing and bragging about setting the murder up, but denied any role in the crime when confronted by the law. Griffin and Douglas both pleaded guilty to murder and possession of a bladed article. The judge sentenced Griffin to a minimum of 16 years in prison, while Douglas will serve at least 15 years. Moore continued to maintain her innocence and took her case to trial.
Your name's Rebecca Moore, isn't it?
Why?
You're Rebecca, right. At this time, Rebecca, listen to me, okay? So, at this time, you're under arrest on suspicion of murder, okay? Because you're alleged to be involved in the murder of Sakad Ali, okay?
No.
The jury found her guilty, and she was sentenced to life with a minimum of 16 years. Number 14. Charlotte Cowles. As a New York Times financial advice columnist and a writer for New York Magazine journalist, Charlotte Cowles makes a living by encouraging people to do smart things with their money and their lives. But she failed to practice what she preached in October 2023 when she was duped into handing $50,000 over to a scammer posing as a CIA agent. It all began when Cowles received a call from a woman claiming to be an Amazon employee who told her that someone had made fraudulent charges to her account. Everything looked fine on all of Cowles' financial accounts, but the caller convinced her that someone had created an Amazon business account in her name and charged $1,000 worth of electronics to it. Despite no evidence of this being the case, Cowles believed the woman, who explained that Amazon had recently been plagued by identity theft problems. The supposed employee went on to claim that the company had formed a partnership with the Federal Trade Commission to crack down on the issue. She offered to connect Cowles to an FTC agent who told Cowles that nearly 24 accounts had been opened in her name and that a car rented in her name had been found south of the Mexican border with blood in it. Believing there were warrants out for her arrest and that someone had ravaged her good financial standing, Cowles was eager to clear her name and assist in the investigation. The agent, Calvin, even warned her that if she didn't cooperate, she risked legal problems. Calvin convinced Cowles to withdraw $50,000 from the bank in cash, claiming that her accounts would soon be frozen due to the investigation and that he was tasked with keeping her money safe. At various points throughout these interactions, Cowles suspected she was being scammed. But Calvin and his colleagues had an answer for everything and continued to dangle the prospect of legal problems over her head. Cowles handed over the money to a stranger in an SUV with dark tinted windows and realized almost immediately afterward that she had been taken by fraudsters. She contacted law enforcement, but it's unclear whether the scammers were identified or arrested. Despite her embarrassment, Cowles went public with her story for the sake of showing that no one is immune to falling for a scam. She also shared her experience as a warning to others to be vigilant and to know what signs to look out for. Number 13. Stephen Harris IV. 20-year-old Southern University student Stephen Harris IV juggled his college life, which included being in the university's renowned marching band, with the responsibilities of being a young single father. He tried to co-parent with his child's mother, Aaliyah Martin, after they broke up, but when his ex violated their custody agreement by moving to Texas without notifying him, he took the matter to court. Harris was intent on pursuing full custody, so when he failed to show up for a court hearing in July of 2024, his family immediately knew that something was very wrong. They had reported him missing the previous day after he vanished from his Francisville, Louisiana home. Nearly a week later, he was found dead with multiple gunshot wounds in Wilkinson County, Mississippi. Based on the level of decomposition, the medical examiner determined that Harris was killed very shortly after he was last seen alive. Investigators traced the crime to Martin and two alleged co-conspirators, 21-year-old Derek Terrell Hollins and 20-year-old Kalagia Jack. Harris's mother, LaSonia Harris, told local station WBRZ that she believes the suspects lured her son to his death. At the time, Harris and Martin were not on talking terms, leading LaSonia to suspect that Stephen was tricked into getting into an unfamiliar car. She claimed that Martin had told her that Stephen had gone to a party, but none of his usual friends knew where he was, which served as an additional red flag for the concerned mother. Moreover, Martin allegedly told LaSonia that Stevens' body was found where his cell phone last pinged, a location that had only been disclosed to law enforcement and the victim's parents. Logically speaking, LaSonia concluded that the only way Martin would know this information was if she was involved in her son's murder. Prosecutors are accusing Martin, Hollins, and Jack of conspiring to kill Harris, who was shot using a handgun that had been modified with a Glock switch to function as a fully automatic weapon. All three suspects have been charged in Louisiana with conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, and Mississippi authorities also reportedly plan to pursue charges. Number 12. Wyndham, Lathem, and Andrew Warren. 26-year-old hairdresser Trenton Cornell Duran Lowe was stabbed more than 70 times while sleeping at his boyfriend's luxury Chicago condominium in July of 2017. Police discovered his body 15 hours later after the building's front desk received an anonymous call. The victim had been attacked with such rage that the knife blade broke and he was nearly decapitated. At the time of his murder, Cornell Duran Lowe was trying to find his path in life. He had recently graduated from cosmetology school but had already bounced around from one job to the next, feeling discouraged when he failed to establish the sizable clientele base that he had hoped for. His mother, Michelle Duran Lowe, would later tell the Chicago Tribune that her son was a naive country kid who was unaware of the real-world dangers he was exposed to after moving to the Windy City from his sleepy childhood town in Michigan. Surveillance footage showed Cornell Duran Lowe's boyfriend, 42-year-old Northwestern University professor Wyndham Lathem, leaving the condo with 56-year-old Andrew Warren, an Oxford University employee who had suddenly traveled to the United States for the first time shortly before the murder. The two men were nowhere to be found and warrants were issued for their arrest. 8 days later, Lathem and Warren turned themselves in to authorities in California. They had gotten tired of running amid a nationwide manhunt, and Warren was ready to talk while Lathem would stubbornly maintain his innocence throughout the entire case. Warren said that he and Lathem had connected online at a time when they were both feeling depressed. According to prosecutors, the pair made a twisted pact to act out on a shared snuff fantasy. In 2019, Warren pleaded guilty to murder and agreed to testify against Lathem in exchange for a 45-year prison sentence. Pointing the finger exclusively at Warren, Lathem took his case to trial. He was found guilty of first-degree murder in 2021 and sentenced to 53 years in prison the following year. Number 11. Anthonie Ruinard Jr. In November 2024, federal authorities announced fraud charges against 39-year-old Anthonie Ruinard Jr. of Chandler, Arizona for scamming 54 victims out of $5.4 million. Ruinard is accused of running an investment scheme through his business, Legacy Investors Group, Inc., over a 3-year period started in 2020. According to prosecutors, he convinced his victims to hand over large sums of money by guaranteeing a 5% return. But most of Ruinard's clients lost their investments entirely because he used the money to fund an indulgent lifestyle, which included expensive cars and high-rolling gambling sessions at casinos. When investors became impatient to see a return on their funds in 2022, Ruinard sent them emails asking them to be patient. People were still waiting on their payouts the following year when Ruinard was charged with the murder of 18-year-old Parker League, whose charred remains were found in an outdoor fire pit in June of 2023. League had traveled from Nebraska to Arizona to visit a friend when he was last seen leaving a gas station with Ruinard the day before he was scheduled to fly home. Surveillance footage from earlier that evening showed the two leaving a Phoenix nightclub together. From there, it appears that they went to the Tonto National Forest where League was stabbed, dismembered, and burned beyond recognition. Ruinard has remained in custody since his arrest in the murder case, which is scheduled to go to trial in February 2025. He has now also been indicted on 19 federal counts of wire fraud and transactional money laundering for the investment fraud scheme. If convicted of League's murder, Ruinard could face life in prison, while each wire fraud charge carries a maximum sentence of 20 years, and each money laundering count carries a maximum 10-year penalty. Number 10. Colby Sheppard. 27-year-old Colby Sheppard of Enid, Oklahoma, was reported missing on January 4th, 2024. His mother, Latosha Andrew, had bailed him out of jail in late December so he could help with the family business while she underwent a medical procedure. While running errands together shortly after Sheppard's release, he showed Andrew a photo of a woman he had upcoming date plans with. By then, Sheppard had received letters from an incarcerated female friend warning him that some people were after him and encouraging him to leave town, but he apparently didn't feel threatened enough to take the advice and continued living his life like normal. During their search for Sheppard after he went missing, police visited a sober living house where residents told them he had disappeared shortly after Christmas, leaving behind some of his belongings. The next day, Sheppard's car was found abandoned outside a vacant house with the license plate missing. Over the following months, several people told detectives that 45-year-old Victor Botello had admitted to murdering Sheppard. Botello was the uncle of Sheppard's former girlfriend, Kendra Botello, who had vanished in 2022. Believing that Sheppard had harmed his niece, Victor had supposedly lured him to the local residence of a friend, 55-year-old Charles Jordan, with help from 34-year-old Heaven Lee Jordan. According to witnesses, Sheppard denied any involvement in Kendra's disappearance, but Victor and Jordan nevertheless beat him to death. Acting on a jailhouse tip, police searched a vacant house near Charles Jordan's residence, where they found Sheppard's body in the basement. It had been wrapped in a tarp and haphazardly tossed down the stairs. Victor Botello, Charles Jordan, Heaven Jordan, and a fourth suspect, 35-year-old Devin Harris, are all facing first-degree murder charges in connection with the case. Authorities believe that Heaven Jordan lured Sheppard to the residence where he was killed, and that Victor Botello and Charles Jordan beat him to death while Harris acted as a lookout. All 4 defendants remain in custody at the Garfield County Jail amid the ongoing case. Number 9. Emilio Maldonado. Just days before Christmas in 2010, San Antonio real estate agent Janice Tisdale received a call from a client, 63-year-old Emilio Maldonado. He was interested in viewing a $750,000 house for sale in one of the city's upscale subdivisions and wanted to see it later that day. Maldonado told Tisdale that he would bring his banker to the viewing, which was scheduled for that evening, but he showed up alone. Tisdale, who was 68 years old at the time, asked Maldonado where his banker was. He said that the banker couldn't make it to the meeting, which Tisdale found suspicious. The previous month, Maldonado had signed a contract and stated his intentions to put a down payment on a different home, but had never followed through. At the very least, he was flaky, but something about his behavior caused the real estate agent to feel unsafe. Tisdale proceeded to show her client the house despite feeling put off by the situation. During the viewing, which lasted for over an hour, she became increasingly uncomfortable. She told Maldonado she had to leave for another appointment and allowed him to exit the house first. As she went to lock the front door from the outside, Maldonado struck her in the back of the head with a metal stick. Tisdale was injured and disoriented but remained conscious and quickly rose to her feet. For nearly an hour, Maldonado demanded $4,000 and kept her cornered on the front porch. The moment she saw an opportunity to escape, Tisdale ran. Maldonado caught up with her and began dragging her back toward the house, but a car full of teenagers saw what was happening and stopped. Tisdale got into the car and the Good Samaritans took her to the police. Shortly thereafter, an officer saw Maldonado driving past and pulled him over. In the meantime, Tisdale was taken to the hospital where doctors stapled her head wound shut. Maldonado was convicted of aggravated robbery and sentenced to 60 years in prison, effectively amounting to a life sentence. He's now 86 years old. During an interview with 2020, 5 years after the assault, he claimed he was under the influence of drugs when he attacked Tisdale. The show also spoke with Tisdale, who said that she had continued to work as a real estate agent but no longer went to viewings alone and always carried a gun. She stayed in touch with the teens who stopped at the crime scene, whom she credited with saving her life and considered them family. Number 8. Dear Auntie Bernard Pleasant. Shortly before 11 p.m. on April 14th, 2023, 54-year-old Larry Wilson was shot while sitting in his SUV outside a San Antonio apartment complex. Witnesses reported seeing a man in a red hoodie firing the fatal bullets from outside the passenger side window of the vehicle. The suspect then grabbed a duffel bag from inside the SUV and fled on foot. He managed to elude the authorities despite the immediate launching of an intensive manhunt. Wilson's family said it was highly unusual for him to be out that late at night. They also described him as an easygoing and friendly person, making it difficult for them to imagine who might want him dead. Clueless about what would have drawn him away from his house, but knowing he never hesitated to assist those in need, they theorized that he was helping a friend. A search of Wilson's phone later revealed that he had planned to meet with a man he had exchanged explicit messages with on Grindr. Based on fingerprints on Wilson's vehicle and other evidence, police would eventually identify the suspect as 22-year-old Dear Auntie Bernard Pleasant. He was still at large the following day when law enforcement responded to a request for a welfare check at the apartment of 21-year-old Joseph Quinton West. A friend had gone there to check on West after not hearing from him for several days and had seen his body through a window. Responding officers found West lying face down in bed with a gunshot wound to the back of his head. A shell casing at the scene matched the shell casings that had been recovered at the scene of Wilson's murder, and Pleasant's fingerprints were found at the residence. Further investigation revealed that West had connected with Pleasant on Grindr shortly before his death. Warrants were issued for Pleasant's arrest and he was booked into custody on 2 murder charges. Updates on the case have not been forthcoming, and jail records show that Pleasant was released from the Bexar County Jail in October 2024. He does not appear to be in state or federal custody, leaving the outcome of the case unclear. Number 7. Enijah Wilson and Deaundre Manning. On July 29, 2021, a teenage couple lured 20-year-old Darnay Almond to a secluded area in the Cincinnati, Ohio suburb of Forest Park. Deaundre Manning and his girlfriend Enijah Wilson planned to rob Almond, who Wilson had agreed to be intimate with in exchange for money. Almond had met Wilson online, unaware that he was being targeted by criminals who planned to rob him. Prior to meeting Wilson in person, they had exchanged messages about how much Almond would pay her for specific acts. And while doing so would have been against the law, Almond did not appear to be a habitual offender. As a college student who worked 2 jobs, it seems as though he was a generally law-abiding person who made a really regretful choice and paid for it with his life. During the early morning hours, Almond picked Wilson up and drove to the remote site. Shortly thereafter, Manning approached the parked car with a gun and demanded money from Almond, who resisted. Manning shot Almond 3 times before he ran away, and he didn't get far before he collapsed onto the pavement and died. About an hour later, a bar customer noticed Almond's body on the ground outside while leaving the establishment. An employee dialed 911 and a homicide investigation was soon underway. After falling under suspicion, Wilson told police that she had no idea her boyfriend had planned to kill Almond. 2 years later, in 2023, Manning pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter and aggravated robbery. He was sentenced to 25 to 30 years in prison. Wilson pleaded guilty to the same charges the following year and received a 20 to 25.5-year sentence, with credit for more than 2.5 years of time served while in pre-trial detention. Number 6. James Lombardi. 29-year-old Crystal Boswell was reported missing in Fall River, Massachusetts on April 1st, 2017. She had been last seen the previous night with a man named Jimmy, who was later identified as 32-year-old James Lombardi. Following an appeal to the public for information, law enforcement received an anonymous tip claiming that Lombardi had buried Boswell's body in the yard of a vacant house in Cranston, Rhode Island, where he had been working as a roofer. Boswell's remains were found in a 6-feet-deep grave on the property, and Lombardi has been charged with her murder. According to prosecutors, Boswell and Lombardi had met just weeks before the young woman's death. It's unclear whether Boswell knew of Lombardi's extensive criminal record, which dated back to 2003 and included past assaults on strangers and his ex-girlfriend. According to news reports, the nature of these previous cases indicates a tendency to fly off the handle and go into a rage. Lombardi had met Boswell 3 years after his release from prison for felony assault and possessing a stolen car. On the night Boswell was last seen alive, she had gone to a bar with Lombardi and 2 of his friends. They stayed until closing, and Lombardi's friends dropped him and Boswell off at his father's house in Cranston. During an argument shortly thereafter, Lombardi struck Boswell in the head with a hammer multiple times, then strangled her to death with her tank top. He placed the woman's body in a recycle bin and drove it to the house in Cranston using his father's taxi. Crystal's mother, Jody Boswell, would later tell the Providence Journal that her daughter was too trusting. She described Crystal as having a heart of gold and said that she believed it made her vulnerable to bad people. In early 2018, Lombardi pleaded guilty to murder and was sentenced to life in prison. He did not apologize and expressed no remorse for his actions during his sentencing hearing. Number 5. Millie Bradley. 46-year-old Ross Connolly was murdered by home intruders as he slept in his bed during the early morning hours of May 1st, 2023. The teenage killers, Louis Armstrong and Harvey Hughes, entered Connolly's home in the English village of Wheatley Hill and beat him to death over a social media feud. They fled the scene in a getaway car driven by Armstrong's girlfriend, Millie Bradley, who waited outside while the homicide took place. Connolly was the cousin of Armstrong's mother and had recently insulted a woman on Facebook, sparking the dispute which ultimately led to his death. His murder came across as particularly heinous due to his ailing health. Suffering from the consequences of a years-long drinking problem, Connolly almost never left his house and slept in his living room due to his medical issues. Armstrong likely knew about the victim's weakened and vulnerable state, but still took no mercy on him. In 2023, Armstrong and Hughes were found guilty of murder. They were both sentenced to life, with a 26-year minimum for Hughes and a 24-year minimum for Armstrong. Millie Bradley claimed to have no knowledge that Armstrong and Hughes had killed Connolly, but that she simply waited outside. She denied the charge of assisting an offender, but changed her plea to guilty several days into her trial. In September 2024, she was sentenced to 2 years in prison for her role in the events surrounding Connolly's murder. While handing down the sentence, the judge acknowledged that Bradley may have been unaware beforehand that an attack was going to take place inside Connolly's home, but he stopped short of believing that she had no idea that anything violent had taken place, given the noise and commotion at the scene, as well as Armstrong's recent feud with the victim. During mitigation, Bradley's defense attorney described the young woman as immature and totally naive, but the judge hesitated to go along with this narrative, instead stating that she had acted out of a misguided loyalty. Number 4. Reeva Johnson and Holly Mitchell. A 76-year-old Brooklyn man named Vincent had no idea he was being targeted when he began crossing paths with 24-year-old Reeva Johnson in the Bay Ridge neighborhood during his daytime errands. They struck up a friendship in 2010, and Johnson persuaded Vincent to invest in gold, telling him it would pay bigger dividends than his bank. Believing the young woman had his best interests at heart, Vincent wrote a check for $150,000 to a coin dealer in Florida whom she had recommended. He handed over another $150,000. 3 weeks later, and never received any of the collectible coins he thought he had purchased, Vincent was swindled out of another $450,000 when Johnson allegedly convinced him that her friend, 23-year-old Holly Mitchell, needed kidney surgery. The senior citizen's friends eventually became concerned about the situation and reported it to the authorities, and in June of 2011, Johnson and Mitchell were arrested on suspicion of grand larceny and other charges. They could have faced up to 37 years in prison if convicted as charged, but the outcome of the case is unclear. Speaking with the New York Post after the arrests, Vincent admitted that he still had feelings for Johnson and that he felt bad for how things turned out, even though he knew he had been scammed. Number 3. Ziamara Lopez. In May of 2024, a New Jersey paramedic named Ziamara Lopez received a call from a phone number that appeared on her caller ID as Wells Fargo Bank. The person on the other end informed her that the bank had detected fraudulent activity in her bank account. Using a type of smooth-talking spiel that scammers are known for, the caller persuaded Lopez to provide sensitive bank account information. The phony Wells Fargo employee then told her that the bank had formed a partnership with Uber and that a driver was en route to collect her debit card for forensic analysis. Unaware that she was being scammed, Lopez handed the card over to the driver. Shortly thereafter, she discovered that nearly $20,000 had been drained from her savings account. She had worked her entire life to set the money aside for her daughter's college education, and in the blink of an eye, almost all of it was gone. Lopez called Wells Fargo and they froze her account, stopping the thieves from stealing what little was left. The bank initially refused to replace the stolen funds, noting that Lopez had enabled the fraud by providing information that its employees would never ask for over the phone. Desperate to get her hard-earned money back, Lopez contacted ABC's 7 on Your Side team of investigative journalists. At the news outlet's request, the bank restored Lopez's account to the full amount. A Wells Fargo spokesperson reminded the public not to trust a phone call just because of what the caller ID says and to never give sensitive account details over the phone. Today's topic was requested by Proud Loner Chick 8199. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Jeffrey Moynihan Jr.
What's your name?
Yeah.
How do you pronounce your last name?
Moynihan?
Okay. You have an arrest warrant for your arrest?
For what? I'll let you, we'll go through that in a second, right? For what?
Which day?
Take the 10. Grant that to me. I'm not the one that wrote the warrant. When the detective comes out here, he'll explain it to you.
In 2023, a 74-year-old Texas woman began exchanging Facebook messages and emails with who she believed was Elon Musk. As you've probably already guessed, the senior citizen was unsuspectingly corresponding with an imposter. Several months after they began talking, the Musk impersonator offered the woman an investment opportunity. He promised a $55 million return on a $500,000 investment, and to the victim, it seemed like too good of an opportunity to pass up. In reality, it was too good to be true. By the time the woman's husband discovered the series of large bank transactions that had taken place, his wife had been conned out of an estimated $600,000. All along, he knew his wife wasn't interacting with the real Elon Musk, but had been unable to convince her that she was being duped. He didn't find out that over $500,000 of the couple's money had been given to the fraudster until their bank told him about the suspicious activity. Law enforcement traced $250,000 of the victim's missing money to bank accounts belonging to 56-year-old Jeffrey Moynihan Jr. of Bradenton, Florida. He reportedly told investigators that he obtained the money for a woman he was talking to online, indicating that he too may have been the target of a scam, but there's also evidence that he used some of the ill-gotten funds to treat himself to an indulgent lifestyle outside of his means. In November 2024, Moynihan was arrested on suspicion of grand theft and booked into the Manatee County Jail in lieu of $250,000 bail. None of the stolen money has been recovered. Number 1. Gullible gang takes the bait. On a Saturday afternoon in 2018, a gang of 6 criminals entered an e-cigarette shop in Charleroi, Belgium, and attempted to rob the owner. Instead of panicking or caving to their demands, the owner got creative. Identified in news reports as a man named Didier, he spent 15 minutes talking to the thieves and eventually persuaded them to return to the store at a later time when he said he would have more money. It bought him enough time to call the police, who didn't believe that the suspects would be foolish enough to return. Lo and behold, they came back to the store not only once but twice. The first time they returned, law enforcement had not yet arrived, so Didier once again convinced the men to come back a little later. They returned for a second time and were met by waiting police officers who promptly took them into custody. Thanks for watching. Would you rather be married to the most skeptical or the most gullible person in the world? Let us know in the comments section below.